Welcome to our podcast on culture, leadership, and inclusion. I'm Sasha Graham.
And I'm Keon West, and we're here to bring you the very best of the science
and practical solutions on how to enhance your workplace culture and other fun things.
Let's talk all things shame and embarrassment.
Okay. I feel like we should be honest with the listeners at this point, that this is not, I'm not like an expert in the science of shame, right? We're not walking in with an expertise on like, when you're ashamed, this is, I mean, this is more realism. We're here, this is raw, unscripted, you know, this is say it like it is, no preparation.
This is where you and I share embarrassing stories from our lives.
Yeah. And I think there's some usefulness to that. I think it reminds everyone that we all screw up all the time. And so, if you think you can make it out of this without being embarrassed, then that's ridiculous. And, maybe we could help a bit with how to handle other people's embarrassing stuff when they come up. So do you want to start talking about embarrassing things?
I will start because I think it's important to talk about embarrassing things, because when we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, there's actually a lot of shame and embarrassment, and people use shame a lot as a tool to promote the topic, which I think both I quite disagree.
Yeah.
But then genuinely, people who are trying to do a good thing, they often find themselves in difficult situations, especially when it comes to like conversation.
Yeah.
So I had a situation yesterday where I was at an event and I was networking, and in my networking groups, it was me talking to other people. And what came up in the conversation is that one of them was originally from Russia and the other one was from Ukraine. So I mentioned sort of like, again, with sort of quite enthusiastically, in hope that we'll, happily connect, that I'm also from Ukraine, and look at that. So we probably can speak Russian. And I said that in Russian, saying like, oh, well, we can even switch to Russian if we wanted to. And that killed the conversation. So they both became very uncomfortable. And at this point, I was like, okay, oh, we don't have to do that. And I just kind of realized that, and nothing that I have said is inappropriate in any way. And actually, it's quite, I think, depending where you're from, it would be quite a normal thing to do altogether.
Yeah.
But considering the current climate and the ongoing war in Ukraine, it is quite a challenging topic, and it's a very sensitive topic. And I've had this conversation many times. The funniest thing that I'm the person who normally avoids bringing the language conversation. I'm the one who's incredibly mindful of this and is very conscious of that. So, but my actually was eagerness to connect with the two of them, because they were a bit aloof. So I was like looking for ways in, and that basically backfired significantly, because a lot of people have, they're not using Russian language, especially those from Ukraine, and it's just sensitive. I don't think again, it's not as much as inappropriate as it can just be triggering and painful for people, which, you don't necessarily want to evoke negative emotions.
That thing you did, I've also done that. I used to live in France, and I meet French people, and sometimes I'm like, ah oui, j'habitais à Paris il y a 15 ans. And they're like, oh, you habited à Paris il y a 15 ans. We all talk a bit about who lived where, and we love it. And I mean, I forgot so much of my French, right? So, but it's a moment of connection, that you're right, that the ability to speak the same language, it takes so much work and time, right? Like I could learn a couple of words of Russian, but it'd take me years to be able to fluently speak to someone else in Russian. So it's such a signal that, oh yes, we have things we can bond over. And so I can see why that was so exciting. And then I can see why like your entrails must have like dried up and felt all cold when you realize, no, that was the wrong move. And now I'm alone. And now I'm just here in this really terrible conversation, and I don't know how to get out of it. What did you do?
I think the conversation naturally just moved on into something else.
Just kind of wandered away.
Yeah, but we also sort of like quickly, but then there's another person who joined the group, and then obviously that changed the dynamic.
Yes, I suppose so.
But I
Yeah,
have to say that well, actually no, maybe let's talk about problems and challenges first, and then we'll talk about solutions.
yeah. And I mean, this is not like your thing, because I think your thing is like a genuine attempt at connection. But my thing, which I do mention in my book, The Science of Racism example, is just a time when I just said something racist, which isn't great. So I don't know why I keep talking about this. I don't know why people, I mean,
Confession time. Where
who
else are
wants
you
to
going to
hear
put your
this?
ego? Yes.
Okay. But I
Come
was.
off your pedestal.
I don't want to. I just want to be on the regular ground. I don't want to dig myself into a hole. I don't enjoy that. But everyone screws up. So yes, I do mention it in my book. And I went to a university that was really quite international. And I'm saying this to preface this. I'm already making excuses for
No, I
myself,
know.
right? Lots of people were from other places. So like I was from Jamaica, like grew up in Jamaica, flew to there to go to university, and I had a friend who was from Japan, grew up in Japan, and flew to the university. Um, and we were at this play, and it was one of those artsy plays or artsy dance performances. I can't remember. It was on a stage, and they just show symbols of stuff. And they just showed a symbol that looked like, I don't know, some kind of Asian, so like a katakana, hiragana kind of, kanji, something, like Chinese script or Japanese script. And so there's a guy sitting next to me who is Asian, who looks Asian. And so I tap him on the shoulder and I say, "Hey, do you know what that means?" And then he responds in like a really strong American accent, "Excuse me, sir. No, I do not." And then I realized, oh no, I'm just being racist. I assumed that you were from somewhere else, which is like not really fair. And it was so embarrassing. And it wasn't even like your conversation because we were just sat there. And so I couldn't even leave, right? I just had to sit there for the rest of the performance in front, just like with him right there. And me thinking, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't know, should I say? I didn't say anything. We just sat there quietly until the performance ended and then I left. So not my finest moment. Not great.
No, but I think but the challenge is exactly a lot of these inadvertent conversations, they often can turn into microaggressions, right? And I think
Yeah,
this is what we find a lot with conversations with our clients who are, let's say, predominantly white men in power, who
yeah,
often come and say, okay, I was trying to connect, and then I said this thing, and I don't really even understand why this thing is so bad or wrong, but
yeah.
yes, and a lot of the time it does come from a place of ignorance rather than arrogance.
Yeah. And I think it's also a basic fact of life that nobody wants to be embarrassed, right? No one walks into any situation thinking, "Oh, I'm going to screw this up. Like, let's say something awful and have lots of the conversation dry up around me." Like, that's no one's desired outcome. So I think people are already quite sensitive. Like, there's no further work needed on the don't do stuff that will embarrass yourself front. Like, everyone's got the message. I think the question is then, what do we do when we accidentally stumble into these things? And you're right that people don't do it on purpose, but they're doing it out of ignorance one way or another.
Mm. So, what do you think about solutions?
So I think it was occurring to me, there was another conversation I had yesterday that's kind of the mirror image of the conversations we're talking about. And the conversation, nothing bad happened, right? It was getting quite intense, and we were talking about the toppling of the statue of Edward Colston, which I don't know if you
Mm.
remember. It was a couple of years ago, yes, in
Yeah.
Bristol. Big slave trader. People still had statues up about him. A lot of people had complained about it. It hadn't been taken down, so they just pulled it down, chucked it in the river. That might not. That's brief, right? So check the facts on that. That's a really big summary, oversimplification. There's a lot more that happened. Um, I was talking to this guy, white guy, and he says, "Yeah, about the statue. And, I don't want to, I want to be very careful about this. I don't want to put my foot into it. And, I want to be very clear. I'm not entirely sure. And maybe I'm speaking from a place of ignorance." And I thought he was going to say something like, "Well, I quite like slavery," because he'd like built it up so much. It was like a really big intro. And then he said, "If I was a black teenager in Bristol, I think I'd have more pressing problems than the statue of Edward Colston." And I'm like, that's not a dramatic, like, that's not a terribly shameful thing to say. Like, I'm not saying he's correct. And I'm saying maybe as a white person, telling Black people what their big problems are or are not, sure, you should be cautious about that. You shouldn't walk into a room and say, listen, Black people, you should worry about this and not that. Obviously, a bad move. So I appreciate the work, but I kind of think that maybe sometimes when it comes to the shame, we could remember that, yeah, we've screwed up, but probably we're not unique in screwing up. Like we have, like I was probably not the only person in that man's life, maybe even that week, who had asked him some ridiculous question implying that he like was, straight off the plane from China as opposed to having grown up in Minnesota his entire life. So that was a microaggression and a bad one, but the badness is his experience of it, which is too common, not my experience of doing it, which is rare. But then I kind of blow it up in my mind because I'm like, oh no, this embarrassing thing happened to me. So maybe that would be helpful to think, it's probably not the first time this has happened to him today. Who knows? But it's not about me that way.
Mm. I think for me, one of the key solutions is to actually just take ownership of that and admitting that this is happening.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of like call yourself out in a way, or just be open to have somebody call you out and not get defensive.
Yeah.
So in my situation, what I've done the next day, because I still felt a bit embarrassed about it, I've sent a LinkedIn request saying it was lovely to meet you and chat to you, but also I do apologize about the comment. I appreciate that it's sensitive and can be triggering and, evokes difficult emotions. So,
Oh,
and I don't know, if they, I don't know how they feel. So they might feel angry, they might feel embarrassed, they might not feel anything at all.
yeah, that's possible. It also makes me think about what might be helpful in your situation, not for you to do, but for other people. Because I think sometimes we use shame as a tool, but shame's kind of a shotgun. It's not a sniper. So shame just says something bad has happened, but it doesn't say what. And I know that's a lot to ask of people who feel that something weird has happened, but if they could say, oh, the conversation dried up because we felt like this and that. So because like you don't know what the awkward thing was, right? It could have been anything. And I think the kind of scrambling in the dark to figure out what went wrong is so much harder. Whereas in my situation, like he didn't say so, but the guy was pretty clear, like, no, the problem here is that you're being racist and you think I'm from China, but I am from fucking Minnesota, so stop doing that. Which was in many ways a blessing because then I knew what the problem was and I knew how to address it. But I think your situation's harder because you're still guessing at what the problem is.
Mm. But also it's your situation is also more nuanced in a way, right? Because if it was a different context, right, it was only because you're in the US.
Yeah,
Whereas like if you were talking to an Asian person in Japan, you would assume that they can speak
yeah,
Japanese or like
yeah,
it's that contextualization that made a difference. And because you were in the context of an event, it also primed you to assume that people who are going to be here they would also have the knowledge.
I've given myself all those excuses. I've been doing this for years. I've been running through a list of all the reasons why it was probably fine for me to say, but none of them convince me entirely. Every time I think of that, I still get a slight like feeling of sickness in my throat, which is weird because it was 20 years ago and I could just let it go. My solution is not to think about it, just repress those thoughts as much as possible. And
That's
that
that's
makes
not a healthy way of dealing with
yeah,
emotions.
I
That
don't know
really,
what you're talking about, Sasha. I forgot about it.
yeah, no, you have a trigger point, and then you have expression, and then you have resolution. So it is about getting to that resolution, which is in your case probably forgiving yourself and moving on.
Probably.
And I think that, but again, that is more of a helpful solution. What we don't want people to just fester
Yeah,
in it. You don't want people to become defensive or resentful. So
yes,
what you want people is to learn from these kind of experiences that, I should be a bit more sensitive, or I should watch out in terms of what I say and how it makes people feel. Because
yeah,
it is about impact, especially
yeah,
when you're in a position of power.
yes,
I think people underestimate how much influence their words, their interactions have on team.
Yeah. And I think also when we're caught up in a bad situation or in a shameful moment, it's easy to forget all the other reasons why the person still wants to talk to us. Like, I mean, clearly not in my case. Like in my case, I just literally met that man and then said something horrible. And so that was that. But in your case, there's probably a lot that they do want to talk to you about, that they do find interesting and exciting and other things they want to pursue and, cornerstones and things they want to touch on. But I think when you do something and you feel embarrassed, so you feel the conversation dry up, you think, oh, now they don't want to talk to me. But maybe they do. Maybe they really want to talk to you and they loved meeting you. It was just that one thing that made them feel a bit weird. And so remembering that globally, you're probably still, mostly positive in their books. It's just that one thing rather than, people smearing your entire character because of a single offhand comment. Probably not how people think most of the time.
No. And I think, again, looking at some people in power these days, you think, how can they get into a position of power considering everything that they have said and done?
You could do a lot of offhand comments, actually. And
a lot of awful things, and people will still elect you.
They will. I mean, not to get political. We're not political.
We're not political.
We're so political. We're very political. But as a team, yeah, hypothetical.
Yeah. So I do think that one of the best things that you can do is actually, taking ownership of your behavior, even if it makes you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I think this is right, and this is the growth mindset principles.
Yeah.
This is where exactly it shines through. Is those moments of embarrassment, those moments of frustration, those moments of anger, how you respond, whether you're going to lean into, I'm going to learn from this moment. Or if you're going to be defensive or trying to avoid it or like ignore it, suppress it. That's yeah.
I feel attacked, Sasha. I feel attacked.
Again, Keon, this is an opportunity. This is like meta growth mindset practice.
Okay, meta growth mindset. But I think you're right, of course. Seeing it as an opportunity to grow and also keeping some sense of direction and proportion that, this is, yes, it's embarrassing for you, but it's not all about you, that it's also about them and their experience of the situation. And that's very important. And a lot happens to everyone all the time, but it doesn't have to be the biggest moment in your day or their day. And actually things that are handled are just handled and then they can move. They don't need to linger or fester. And it's probably less work if they're just managed, and that's the end of that.
Yeah, exactly. So in conclusion, I would say avoid shame, but use kindness and dignity.
Yeah, I think
own your behavior and your words.
Yeah.
And practice growth mindset.
Yeah, I like that growth mindset. Be solution oriented. Like don't be stuck in what went wrong. Being like, what can we do? How can we build this relationship moving forwards? I guess in that way, it's like every other relationship, isn't it?
Like any other relationship.
Always going to be something that goes wrong, but then you fix it, and that's better.
Yeah, exactly. I think all relationships are the same, except the boundaries and the dynamics are different.
Yeah. Hey, if people want to make us feel better, do you know what they should do? They should write in with all of their most embarrassing stories, like all the really horrible stuff they've said, and then we could feel better and possibly use it for content.
I love that. Please provide us with reassurance and validation.
Yes. So we know that we're not doing the worst out here. We're doing pretty well. We're doing pretty well. Remind us of that we're still good. We're good people.
I can remind you, Keon, that you are a good person.
And you're a good person, Sasha. You're one of the best people.
There you go. See, this is our validation cycle.
This is good. I like it.
Like that.
That's a validation cycle.
Yeah, the validation cycle. There we go. Sorry, this is the hand gesture. Yeah, great. And that's what we need, because that's, again, the topic of diversity and inclusion, it evokes so many negative emotions. The more positive emotions we can add to counterweight, the better.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, while I think all emotions have a potential healthy range, like I think emotions are information. So like anger is a sign that you've been treated incorrectly, and like shame is a sign that you've done something that doesn't align with your values or something like that. I do think they can be weaponized unhealthily. and they can be weaponized too much. And I think if your message on DEI is all shame-based and not growth-based at all, I think something's gone wrong somewhere. I don't think our goal is to make people feel bad. I think our goal should be to make them do better.
Totally. Use your emotions as data.
Yeah, good. I like data. I like coming back to data.
Yeah, always comes back to data.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I think that's all from us.
I think that's more than enough.
More
Thank you for listening.
We would love to hear from you. So do get in touch on social media channels or email us directly.
Yes, get in touch. We'd love to hear what you think, and we'd love you to suggest topics that you'd find interesting. See you next week.